Imagine watching your kid having to go through all that and suddenly it's not as severe anymore and you guys actually can have like some quality of life. So I do hope that eventually people don't just look at cannabis or CBD as snake oil or a drug and stuff like that and just see what's actually happening out there.
Welcome to Her Drive Podcast, a female-focused interview series with women of the world discussing their road trips to success. I'm your host, Cindy Cramblett, a travel expert, business owner, and curious spirit with a knack for meeting fascinating women. Please join me as I hop in the passenger seat and chat with these ambitious women about what drives them, twists and turns, and those pedal to the metal moments. Let's drive. Hello and happy fall, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Her Drive Podcast. I am really excited to be here and to be talking with a fellow farm girl. As many of my long-term listeners may know, I grew up on a farm in Ohio. Both of my parents were children of farmers, so I've got a little bit of that in my DNA, and it's always nice to talk with women who understand agriculture. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Anna Redwood to Her Drive Podcast. Hey, Anna, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. It's lovely to be here.
Awesome. So why don't you tell everybody what it is that you do and where you are?
Yeah, so I'm based out of Oregon. My family and I started a CBD farm. And it's kind of evolved from just being a farm to also an extraction facility. And then we were like, hey, we have great flour, we have great products, great oil. Why don't we also have a brand? So we've branched out since then. Right now, I'm mostly spearheading our CBD cigarette division, Redwood Reserves. And basically, we provide an alternative for people who want to smoke something without it being either tobacco or even people who are trying to cut down on weed a little bit.
Interesting. So kind of going back to what your family does, have you always lived on land? Were you all growing something else? What's the story there?
Yeah, funnily enough, we did not come from a background of farmers at all. I grew up in South Carolina near the beach. And when I went off to college, I wanted to be a lawyer. My oldest brother wanted to be a petroleum engineer. And so he was actually going to college for that already. And then I have, a middle sibling who is only a year older than I am, and he wanted to be a dentist. So we decided, hey, why don't we go to college in the same state? So, we can live together, we can save a little bit of money, and, still have someone familiar. And so we ended up moving out to Oregon. We both loved Portland, and we were going to go to college out there. And then it was right when they legalized recreational marijuana. So we were like, this is kind of interesting. And, my family was always against weed. Like growing up, I'd get in trouble if I was, found to be smoking weed and being high and stuff, which, is understandable. But my oldest brother once sent like a link in the group chat, the family group chat. And he was like, hey, like they just legalized marijuana where you guys are moving to. And actually it's saying that, the projections for the business and the industry in general are pretty great. And we were like, oh yeah. And he's like, well, why don't we get into it? And my first reaction was just like, I literally typed back LOL, like, okay, like this is the guy who never smoked weed in his life and always thought it was like literally the devil's lettuce. But then we really started looking into it further and we were like, hey, like, why don't we do this? And so it started out as just the siblings. My oldest brother, he was going to school for petroleum engineering and he ended up dropping out and basically taking a chance on it. Me and my middle brother, we stopped our studies as well. And we ended up getting one of the first licenses that Oregon kind of gave out. And we found a guy who was owner financing his farm and he believed in us too. He was like, all right, you guys are kind of crazy, but let's do it. And so everything kind of like spiraled and snowballed from there, right? So we started the recreational marijuana farm. That's where we first got into the cannabis industry and the farming. So it was really just learning as we went and researching and, the marijuana and cannabis in general, like, isn't really difficult to grow once you kind of like know the knowledge. It's a weed, and and like in general, it's a weed. So, um, but the hardest part was like the curing, the trimming, the drying. So all of it was really a learning process. But it ended up being that Oregon gave out so many licenses that the supply and demand was just crazy. Like it costed us around like $250 to produce a pound, like finished to sell. The first year we were selling for like 1200 a pound. The second year it was like 300 a pound if you were lucky. So we were kind of like, oh, what do we do? And we had ended up seeing a lot of benefits in cannabis in general, not just for getting high. Like we worked with a veteran group that was basically they had a retreat for veterans with PTSD, and they were helping them with marijuana. So they would actually like our strains that had the least amount of THC. And so we found that that was really interesting because they were like, it helps us the most. Like we can actually function. We're not super high, and it really helps with like everything that they're going through. So that's kind of where we dipped our toes into the CBD industry because we were like, hey, well, we also have these strains that have all the beneficial cannabinoids you guys are looking for. It doesn't get you high as you're also looking for, and it seems to work. So that was how we first got into hemp, and we decided, hey, the recreational marijuana business isn't really going that well for us right now. Like the supply and demand was just kind of crazy, and the competition was really insane. And so we decided to try out growing hemp. We could actually grow like as many acres as we wanted, whereas with recreational marijuana, you could only do 1 acre. And it
Mm.
really took off from there. I mean, there was a huge demand for the smokable flower, which was really interesting to us, but also the CBD oils. So since then, I mean, we've no longer have anything in the recreational marijuana industry just because the hemp industry boomed. You don't have to just stay within your own state. You can actually sell it anywhere, to certain limitations, but also worldwide. So since then, we've expanded into like our own CBD oil company, which is USA Hemp. We have a USA Hemp Brazil sector, which is a strictly prescription based only. And then we also had a lot of demand for the smokable flower, like I said. And so we were like, hey, let's look into doing something different because people were only doing the joints, which you can't really smoke those in public in a state where marijuana isn't legal. People look at you like, what are you doing, right? Because it looks like weed. And so we ended up finding a manufacturer who would work with us who could actually make them to look exactly like cigarettes. But instead of tobacco, it was just CBD flower.
Interesting. So, for those who don't understand the difference between hemp and marijuana, can you explain?
Yeah, I mean, they're both the same plant, right? Like cannabis, except one produces a lot of THC, which is what gets you high. And then hemp is bred to produce very little THC. For it to be legal, it has to be under 0.3%, and it produces a lot of CBD. So, to put that into perspective, the marijuana that you would get that gets you high, those test around like 15 to 30% THC. So, the amount in hemp is so minimal that it really only has the cannabinoids that are beneficial for like helping you maintain balance or relax and unwind without letting you have like a high or feel altered in any way.
I see. That makes sense.
Yeah.
I like a lot of people smoked pot back in my youth, and just as the older I have gotten, the less and less I've enjoyed it or liked it. Actually, I hate it, and I've tried it a few times, in the last couple of years. I'm like, nope, this is not for me. But I have noticed that using like a CBD tincture or like a gummy, or I've never, no, that's not true. In New Mexico, I tried a smoking the flower, and I did notice that it was much more calming, but without like I get paranoid
Mhm.
and kind of like critical when smoking pot, but I didn't experience that at all. Is that typically the response that you get from your clients and customers?
Yeah, I mean, I there's no studies done on it, right? But like what I've noticed a lot is that a lot of our clients are like, "Hey, I used to smoke a ton of pot when I was younger, and I used to smoke like a whole joint or a whole blunt, and it was great. But then at some point, like there's like a tipping point where your body just kind of changes, and it's like it's no longer great for me. Like when I smoke it now, like you said, like you get paranoid and anxious, and it's just not the same calming effect, which is why a lot of people will switch from weed to CBD because you still get that nice, like, unwinding feeling, but there's none of that paranoia or like the heart palpitations and stuff when you're like, oh, what did I just smoke?
Yeah, that's interesting. So, what gave you and your siblings this sense of Bravery, boldness, what however you wanna define it, to say, like, we're gonna do this, we're gonna try it." Where did that come from?
Honestly, I've always just kind of been like that, you know? My parents, from an early age, like, they would always, like, take us on trips and, like, let us have nice things and stuff, but they're like, "Well, you've also gotta work for it." So, there was also that kind of, aspect where we were like, "Hey, like, we wanna do something. We wanna be able to, have, like, a legacy or have, enough freedom for us to be able to travel and do things that we want," and it seemed like this was a really interesting way to go about it. And we were also so young that I think that you have, like, this mentality where you're like, "Oh, I'm invincible," right? You're like, "No, let's just do it, like, we're gonna be successful," and thankfully we were, but it was a really crazy idea to begin with.
Um, yeah, you touched on something really important there. Is that you had that, like, I don't know if gravitas is the right word, but you had a boldness about you that certainly is affiliated with youth.
Yeah.
Um, Amazing. And what year, I'm sorry, was did you all get started?
Well, we all got started when I was 21, so yeah.
Okay. Um, wow, that's awesome. So, what have been some of the challenging moments with starting a business and working and a business within agriculture?
Um, I think our biggest struggles, especially with the cannabis plant, has always been like the harvesting aspect of it because we're up in Oregon. Summers are absolutely beautiful. There's not a drop of rain. And then, fall comes around. And once you really hit into fall, it just starts raining all the time. And hemp, it has, these buds that are very dense. So once they start getting wet, and the humidity, there's a lot of potential for mold. And once that happens, like your crop is just ruined. So I think that was really the hardest thing for us to be able um, to really find out how to do it correctly because we've lost a lot of crops in the past. But thankfully now we have like a pretty good system. And I think it's just about experience and like a routine and learning.
I see. So, what's a sure sign that it's time to harvest?
Well, the plants really let you know, right? So they have these little pistils on them that, as they're growing throughout the whole vegetative stage and flowering stage, they're white. And then once they start maturing and they're really ready to be harvested, they turn gold. So that's when you know, like, okay, this plant is at like peak maturity. Let's harvest. The biggest thing is like you have to dry it correctly. If you don't dry it in the right way, then you'd lose all of the flavor of the plant too. So the experience is like of smoking it is a bit harsher. So
Mhm.
there's like a lot of like small little things that go into it as well.
That's so interesting. And is there a difference in like creating a CBD joint versus a cigarette? Like, how do you manufacture them separately and differently?
Yeah, so the joints are more of like a connoisseur experience to where we only use the actual like hand trimmed buds that you would smoke and they're hand packed and everything. Whereas the cigarettes, they are mass produced, so they are only flower buds, but we don't have the detail of hand trimming and hand selecting the nugs. Basically, like once the flowers are dried and cured, they run through a machine that gets all of the outside leaves off of it. Not as detailed as like someone actually hand trimming it with their scissors. And then they're milled and then sent off to a manufacturing plant that's made specifically for hemp because the tobacco is a very dry leaf and they're cut into strips, whereas hemp is like very, very resinous and oily. So um, I would say that like the joints, if you're looking for more of like a connoisseur experience and you really want to have like the best smoking experience, you would definitely gravitate towards those where they are more expensive. Whereas the cigarettes, you really get more bang for your buck and you still have all the high CBD content in them.
That's so interesting. And what was the who in the family or in your company thought that or solve the issue of people smoking the joints and being kind of looked at as if they were smoking THC joints, and then had the great idea to turn them into cigarettes.
Yeah, I mean, the whole idea with the cigarettes too was about being able to produce enough to meet the demand. Whereas the joints, like I said, I mean, they're made by hand, so you can only have so much produced in a day. But our oldest brother, Rafael, he actually was the one that he was always looking for different solutions and different ways to become more efficient. And that's how he had that idea where it was like, okay, well, there's these people that actually can work with us and we can help modify their machines. And in this way, instead of producing like X amount, we can produce X amount. So it kind
Mm,
of went like that. And then the other problems kind of were solved in their own way. You know, people were letting us know, like, hey, this is amazing because now I can go out to the bar and I stopped smoking cigarettes and my friends are social smokers and I go outside. It's not like I can just use a joint. So you can actually just take out what looks like a regular cigarette. You're not smoking tobacco or nicotine and getting addicted again, but you still have that social aspect.
that's interesting. And okay, so you mentioned addiction. So is CBD non-addictive?
CBD is non-addictive and it actually helps your brain suppress the part of it that like sends out a pang whenever you are craving something. So that's why CBD cigarettes that are actually high in CBD work so well because you're not just replacing like the act of smoking, but you're also helping like all of those withdrawal symptoms and the actual like wiring of your brain that says, hey, like you need a cigarette right now. You're helping that kind of like hush down while you replace them.
That's very interesting. So, what have been some of the major challenges outside of knowing when to harvest the plant?
Oh, I'd say the major challenges in any business where you're producing a product to sell is finding the right outlet to sell. So the distribution, finding the right customers. I think those are definitely the parts that were the hardest for us.
Interesting. And do you ever get pushback from people who say, like, smoking is smoking, it's all bad for you, so why produce something that's harming people?
Yeah, but you know, what we're saying is not that smoking is good for you. It's like obviously smoking anything is bad for you, but it's all about making a better choice. So you can't just go out to the mass people and be like, hey, smoking tobacco is bad for you, so just stop. Some people just really like to smoke. So we're just having something, putting something out there that is a better option, not so much a healthy option.
Got you. I think there's a lot of honor in all of what you just said. And I'm curious, like with your parents, have they kind of shifted their mindset around like weed throughout this process, or were they just kind of maybe standoffish until you switched over to CBD?
Oh, they've definitely changed their mind. I mean, when we first started the business, you know, my dad's always been a little bit more open minded and kind of like, well, you know, you gotta let the kids do what they'll do. And my mom's always really, really against like all kinds of drugs. It was also the way that she was brought up too. And so she was very against it in the beginning. And once we started working with the veteran group, actually, was when she started coming around to the THC aspect of it, because she saw that it wasn't just people getting high and like you know getting belligerent. Like in her mind, it was a gateway drug. It was like you're gonna do that and then suddenly be addicted to meth. And we were like, Mom, like you know, that's really not what's happening here. Like it's a much better alternative for even people who want to like have fun and stuff than alcohol. You know, it does much less harm to your body and so she's really come around now. Now she is, you know, 100% a supporter of both the recreational and the medicinal aspects of cannabis, but she was definitely the tougher cookie to break.
That's interesting. I was in sort of raised with a similar outlook. Um, from my mother that it being a gateway drug. And I think back to the dare days and
Yeah.
making the pledge to never to never do these things. But now as we are growing older and more informed, it's pretty cool to see the actuality of these different plants plants and plant medicines and how they can positively impact our mental state, body functioning and all of that.
Yeah, exactly. Has your mom also changed her opinion on it, or is she kind of still set in the it's still a drug kind of thing?
I think she's a little bit more understanding, more specifically on magic mushrooms and rewiring of their brain. But yeah, she's certainly much more open than ever before. And I wonder, actually, and this should be a conversation I'll have with her, but I wonder if she was just saying all of that in order to scare us to not do it. Perhaps that wasn't her actual opinion of it. If that makes any sense, I'll have to ask her.
Yeah.
Hmm.
That would make sense. You gotta scare the kids straight, honestly.
Totally. If I'm ever a mom, I'll probably enact the same policy.
Yeah. No,
Uh,
exactly, and I always, like, would tell my parents, I'm like, "I told you this stuff was good," and they're like, "Well, yeah, well, not when you're still, like, a teenager and your brain's developing," and I'm like, "Well, that's fair, yeah." Like, there always is a time and place for everything.
absolutely, absolutely. Um, so some more focus on you because I feel like we have a really good idea of what Redwood Reserves does and that Genesis story. But I'm curious about like a female within the CBD space. Are there lots of women in this industry?
I think the cannabis industry is one that does have a lot of females in it because it was so new that the bar was kind of set a little bit equal. Like, I've worked with a lot of women that have started their own companies in the industry that have a lot of success. Although I will say, like, everything is a little bit more male dominated in general, but there's a lot of opportunity for women too.
Got you. Um, what do you think there are as far as advantages for being a woman in business?
Hmm, that's a good question. I would say, women look at things differently than men. I feel like there's more, I guess, like, more of the feeling behind things, like the why you do what you do.
Okay.
I think being a woman has really helped me with that. But in general, like I said, with everything else, like in this industry, the bar is kind of set equal. Like, I've never really felt like, oh, I feel like inferior in here because I'm a woman. Mostly I was like, oh, I feel kind of inferior here because everyone's like 30, 40 years old, and I'm like almost in my early 20s. So I think a different approach in my mind.
I see. And do you have a different way of like thinking and processing challenges than your brothers?
Yes, I do, but that's also because, like, my oldest brother is very analytical. It's like he has to have the numbers, and I'm more of like the why behind it. So I think we think differently in that way.
And when you say why, you're talking more like the purpose of.
Yeah, like the purpose of, like, yeah, exactly. Like, why is it that we're doing this? Like, what are the outcomes? Is that going to be beneficial? Not just like just the numbers.
It's really interesting. So when you have like challenging situations that arise in your life, do you dive into a specific format or do you have like rituals that help bring you back into understanding the why and pushing forward?
When I have, issues in my life, I just kind of sit down and I say, is this going to be this big of a deal in 5 years? And
Yeah.
that kind of helps ground me, and I'm like, okay, and I can kind of work back and think with a clear mind and really solve a problem without just being really impulsive into it.
That is so powerful and it's such a great way to handle the stressors that come through. And I feel like most of the time in the Western world, we are making inconveniences into like ordeals and problems, right? And I love that approach. I think it's such a solid way of handling things. Because most of the time it's not going to be a big deal in 5 years, right?
Yeah, exactly. Something that seems so big right now, and like, because I get like so much anxiety and so much stress, right? Especially having, being a business owner, everything falls on you. But then I'm like, okay, let's calm down. Like, this is something that obviously it can be fixed in 5 years. Am I really going to be having like this much anxiety about this? No. So let's like think with a clear mind.
Yeah, absolutely. So speaking of time, like 5 years down the road, where do you hope to see the family business going?
Oh, I hope it keeps expanding in the way that it is. We're making a lot of push for international markets as well. We're doing a lot of like charity work and philanthropic work. So I would just see all of the fruits of our labor, still progressing and having the companies be bigger than they are now. I know it's like a general broad answer, but
It just sounds like growth, mama.
yeah, exactly.
That's
That's
great. And do you
plan.
all just still operate on one farm or do you have multiple plots of land?
No, we have multiple plots of land. So we have our home base, and then we'll lease out, basically do like a, um, like a buyback program with different farmers. So we'll give them our genetics, and then they'll grow it for us, and then we'll buy it back, just to
Hmm.
meet the demand. I mean, there's only so much that we can do ourselves.
Amazing. And is it all grown in Oregon, or have you chosen multiple places around the country or world?
Yeah, so far it's all been grown in Oregon, just because we've been here since the beginning, and we've helped a lot of farmers with their struggles and stuff like that. So we've kind of built a little community out here.
That's pretty phenomenal. I mean, considering that you all were kind of outsiders, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly. But the cannabis industry in general is a very small world. So I feel like, everyone kind of knows everyone.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Well, do you feel like your business is kind of fitting into cultural norms, or do you think it's pushing against or pulling norms in a different direction?
Oh, I definitely feel like we're pulling against cultural norms. I mean, like a CBD cigarette is just so everyone's like, "What do you mean?" I'm like, "Well, you can still have the act of smoking, and it's CBD, it's not marijuana, you're not gonna get high." There's still a lot of, like, um, how would you put it? Like, a lot of people are still like, "Oh, like, that's still drugs," you know?
Mm.
And then like I said, we also do a lot of push internationally, so we're in, Brazil for both brands for it's only prescription only, so it's really for people like the CBD cigarettes, they're for people who, they have either anxiety or pain or they wanna stop smoking, but just adults. But our CBD oil lines, I mean, they're mostly for children and children with epilepsy, children with autism, and that is pushing against cultural norms immensely because before it was always like, the only thing that you can do is take pharmaceuticals, but they're not really helping. So with the CBD, it's like there is a really positive impact in the lives of these people, but there is still a lot of people that are like, well, you're giving kids drugs. And even the government pushes back against it. So I think every day is like a struggle to keep educating and, keep pushing forward and showing people like, no, like this actually is making a difference.
So you mentioned something really powerful. So children with epilepsy and other issues. So how is this helping them? What is the what is it that they're experiencing that the CBD is aiding in relieving?
Yeah, I mean, so the whole push with giving children CBD, with epilepsy, it actually started with my little cousin in Brazil. So we had the business over here. Brazil had just like they had a movement of moms with kids with autism and epilepsy, and they were seeing that, they were getting oil from the black market. And they were like, it's changing my kid's life. Like he was having a ton of seizures a day. Now he's not, and now he's like not a shell of a human anymore. And so my little cousin, she was born prematurely, she didn't get the care that she needed. It was in like rural Brazil. And she ended up having a bunch of different conditions, but mostly she was having about like 10 to 15 seizures a day.
Mm.
And each one, she regresses back because her brain loses oxygen. And she was on like a ton of different medications. And there was like really nothing behind her eyes because she was just so, as funny as it is, like doped out. And so my cousin was like, you know, I see that you guys make the oil, like over here, we really don't have like a lot of options. Would you guys be able to, do something to help us? And so we ended up getting, importation permits and stuff and sending it to her. And once she started taking the oil, she went from having like 10 to 15 seizures a day, like I said, to like maybe 1 to 2 a day. And then now she's been on the oil for about 3 years now, 3 or 4 years. And she has a seizure maybe once every 6 months. So
That's so interesting. So is it eliminating inflammation, or what's it doing?
yeah, it eliminates inflammation in general, but I'm not sure exactly like where it's targeting in your body, but CBD in general, like all the cannabinoids, we have cannabinoids in our system already. We have like what's called the endocannabinoid system. And it's located like all around our body and it just helps things maintain in balance. So the reason why like, you're having a ton of seizures and all these different things is things aren't in balance in your body. You're having like all these different issues. So with the CBD oil, it's like a full spectrum. It's not just CBD, so it has all the cannabinoids that are in the plant. Um, it really just helps like balance out their bodies, and I mean, the proof is just with like the people that are using it, like they stop having all these seizures. Their quality of life improves. Like now she can actually like say some words and she's very like active and talks and stuff like that. And before she was just kind of like sitting there having a bunch of seizures all day, you know?
That's amazing. That in and of itself is a beautiful why in producing your product if it's helping people who are. I mean, you can't function if you are having seizures, and have autism. My sister used to work with children with severe autism, and I would go and into her classroom every once in a while and just observe what was going on, and it was so much. And these poor little children. So I applaud you and your family for what you all are doing, and it makes sense that you feel as though you're pushing or pulling against cultural norms, but hopefully in pulling, you'll feel a lightening of the resistance over time.
Yeah, hopefully, because I mean, it doesn't just change the lives of the actual like patients, but it changes the lives of even their family. Because I mean, imagine having to like deal with watching your kid having to go through all that, and suddenly it's not as severe anymore, and you guys actually can have like some quality of life. So I do hope that eventually people don't just look at cannabis or CBD as like snake oil or a drug and stuff like that, and just see like what's actually happening out there.
Yeah, that's amazing. Absolutely. Well, this is my favorite question to ask every single person that comes on her drive. If you could go back in time and give a younger you some words of advice, how old would you be and what would you say?
Hmm. I think I would probably go back to like my 12 or 13-year-old self and be like, stop trying to look so forward into the future that you don't appreciate the now. Because ever since then, I mean, I remember like I was like, oh well, I can't wait to be a teenager, and then I'll have more freedom. Can go out and do all this stuff with my friends. And then it was, oh, I can't wait to be 16 and have a car and drive. And then, oh, I can't wait to be 18 and go to college. But you kind of, I've always been so looking forward into like the next step that I didn't really appreciate the step I was in. So it took a while to break out of that mindset. But I think I would have enjoyed my youth a lot more had I just been living in the moment.
Hmm. That is solid advice. Well, I love that you were able to take some time and be in this moment with me and share the story of Redwood with the Her Drive listeners. Anna, is there anything else that you would like to share about you, your family, your businesses?
I think we pretty much covered like the general overview of what we do and why we do it. But if anyone listening wants to try any CBD products that don't get you high but help you feel really relaxed, definitely head on over to our websites and check them out.
Amazing. And what are your what's your website so they can find you?
Yeah, so it's redwoodreserves.com and usahemp.com.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, Anna Redwood. It has been such a joy.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you for having me on.
Thanks for listening to Her Drive with Cindy Cramblett. If you want to know more about today's guest or know a fascinating woman you'd love for me to interview, please see the show notes, visit Instagram or her-drive.com. And please, 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 if you love the show, leave a review on iTunes. Thanks for riding along and subscribe to join our next woman and her drive to success.